Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today is August 17th, 2022, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as I always am, by the always sunny Western Standard news editor, Dave Naylor. How are you feeling, Dave?
Jim Dandy. Jim Dandy.
What?
Jim Dandy. Good.
Is that a weird British sign?
No.
I think that might be a weird American one.
Might be a weird American one. It means good. I'm feeling good.
Okay. I'm not going to ask Corey how he's doing. Corey, thank you.
More of the same. If I'd have come up with Jim Dandy, I would have gone that route.
Jim Dandy?
Yeah.
I've never
Jim
heard that
Dandy.
before. I don't know. It's got to be a weird British thing. Too many damn British. Too many damn British around here. Speaking of too many British around here, we're going to have another Brit actually coming in. Nigel Hannaford is going to be stepping up as the new opinion editor of the Western Standard. Very excited to have him on. He was a senior columnist at the Calgary Herald, member of the Herald's editorial board. And then from 2006 to 2015, he was the manager of the speechwriting department for Stephen Harper in the Prime Minister's office. He's going to be coming on, as Corey transitions to more of a columnist role with the Western Standard. Nigel's going to be stepping up as opinion editor. So there's going to be just too many damn Brits. Okay.
It's Jim Dandy.
Okay. We've got an interesting show today. Kenney has pointed and fired his guns at Danielle Smith and her proposed Sovereignty Act. Really an unprecedented level of involvement from the outgoing leader of a political party, very seriously meddling in the race to replace him. I've never seen anything like it. So we're going to talk about what Kenney's up to, what's he on about, and is he actually going to make any progress for candidates that he favors, or at least maybe harm the prospects of candidates that he does not favor. TD Bank, this is a great exclusive Western Standard story that TD Bank says don't vote Conservative. If you do, you're a racist. Indigenous people don't like pipelines, and Conservatives like pipelines. Therefore, if you vote Conservative, you're a racist. Definitely not anything racist, though, about saying an entire race of people have a singular view on an issue of infrastructure and energy development. That's not racist at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
No. So yeah, that's just a fantastic exclusive Western Standard story we're going to get into. And Tamara Lich, enemy number one in Canada, insurgent extraordinaire, has been honored at a big gala in Calgary. Best I'm aware, they have not sent the GTF2 special forces to storm the place. Maybe they figured that the rebels should be allowed to have a meeting, get them all in one place so we could photograph them or something. But Tamara Lich has been honored at an event. We're going to talk about how that went and what the fallout is. Before we get going, though, I want to thank my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I always say I've been a member of the CSSA for a decade, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably been a lot longer than that. I've been trusting the CSSA to represent my rights as a gun owner in Canada for at least sometime over a decade. I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, you've been saying a decade for the last 2 years.
I have. Okay, so then it's at least 12.
At least 12 years.
Okay, but maybe I'm just stuck in habit.
A decade sounds better than 12.
More than a decade.
More than a decade.
More than a decade.
Jim Dandy.
Yeah. Oh God. If you're not, you gotta support the CSSA. If you're not yet a member, the CSSA is on the front lines defending the right of firearms owners across Canada against attempts by the Liberal government to seize your guns and do everything they can to make sure we're left with little left than paper straws to use as pea shooters left in this country. So if you're not yet a member of the CSSA, you should be. Go to CILA.org. I don't know what we're going to do without you, Corey. I can't say the damn thing.
Well, we got it up on the screen for others.
But there you go. Just read the bottom of the screen. That should be good enough. Okay. Thank you, CSSA. So let's move on. When Jason Kenney was ousted by members of the UCP as leader, a lot of people were expecting that he would just step down either immediately or within a few days to allow an acting or interim leader to take over. That's not always what happens, but it's pretty unprecedented that a leader of a party that just formed a majority government 3 years earlier, is ousted by his own members. There was a lot of ruckus over this. In fact, there were threats of fisticuffs in the caucus meeting that was deciding this issue, if Kenney should go or be replaced by an acting interim leader. Kenney did stay, though, but he was very clear that he's going to stay out of the leadership race. Scout's honor, he's staying out of it. Last Saturday was the radio show?
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Well, Kenney's staying out of this, so to speak, ended pretty dramatically, didn't it, Dave?
It did on QR 77, lobbed a grenade into the campaign trail by saying Danielle Smith's proposed Sovereignty Act was quote unquote nuts. Said it would lead Canada into a constitutional crisis. The next day, he obviously was well prepared at a press conference and went even further, saying it was nuttier than squirrel turd, quote unquote. And then he went on a long diatribe about how it wouldn't work, and basically saying the whole thing's idiotic. Of course, it's Danielle Smith's it was her first big campaign pledge. I think it's something she's vowed that she would introduce the first day in office. Kenney says, no, he wasn't interfering. He was just repeating what he had said last September when this whole idea first came up. So, yeah, whatever way you want to have it, Mr. Premier, but you certainly influence. You can. He's basically he's hoping to help one of his established candidates, Taves, against Danielle by crapping on her from up high. Whether it works or whether it strengthens her and gives her even more momentum, because he's not an overly liked guy in the province, Mr. Kenney, at the moment. So it may give her an added boost.
Corey, this is certainly unusual. I'm sure there's been minor interventions from outgoing leaders in races before where they maybe say something off the cuff, but this was clearly planned. He was clearly waiting for this question. I'm sure no one would ever have questions planted on a paid talk radio show for the Premier. I'm sure that never happens, but he was clearly ready and willing to go for this. And this wasn't quick comment. He went on at length, and then the press conference Monday, he went on. I think the press said it was a 6 to 8 minute answer. It was a short speech that he gave about it. How unusual is this? And is Kenney? How unusual is this? How offside is it for a premier or a sitting leader to intervene like this?
Extremely unusual. I mean, interim leader is the whole point of having an interim leader who's.
He is not technically an interim leader.
I understand, and I can expand
Although
on
Danielle
that a bit,
did call him an acting leader as a bit of a shot.
Well, he's acting like something.
Yeah.
But, when you're in that role, that transitional role and holding the seat, which in his case was his to begin with, so he's not interim, but he's in that outward role. And, I mean, that was part of the discussion, as you said, at the caucus meeting. Look, I'm just going to maintain the course. I'm not going to step in on the race. It's a matter of convention, form, class, and party unity. You just stay the hell out. I mean, if there was an interim one chosen, it would be expected and assumed this is somebody who has no strong direct connections to any of the campaign teams. We know the reality. There'll be at least hidden or discreet support. I mean, an interim leader or a leader sitting until the end like Kenney is still going to have their preferences, but they keep them to themselves. And to dive in like this, it's unprecedented. I don't think it's going to have the impact he thinks it is either.
So that's where I want to go with this next. He's a pretty unpopular guy in Alberta, although he does have his supporters in the party. He technically got 51% in the leadership review, but that is after they changed the rules about a half dozen times and kept pushing it back down. I think it's very fair to say he would have gotten substantially less than 51% if they hadn't have cheated serially to do it. But he does still have a number of supporters, and this is an internal UCP race. There are still some Jason Kenney fans out there. It's just he's not universally beloved by the party the way he was, say, on election night 2019. Corey, what do you think this is going to have a significant effect? Do you think Kenney's going to get much mileage for this?
Well, he's getting mileage for Smith. I don't think it was intentional at all, but that's really established her as the sole anti-establishment candidate. And if he talks about an act not working, well, there is one person who's familiar with what doesn't work in dealing with Ottawa, because Kenney hasn't had anything successful with him in 3 years as premier. So, I mean, how can he shoot at another plan? People are looking for another plan. Maybe the Sovereignty Act is nuts, but that's for those members to decide. He's not a good authority on what works and what doesn't work with Ottawa right now. But it's similar to that first debate. When there were 7 members and they kept attacking Smith, all you're doing is giving her more oxygen, giving her more time to explain her act and to stand out. As you said, Kenney pulled out all the stops, and this is a members' race. And even with all of that and all of the King's horses and men, he could barely squeak 51% of the members to vote for him. And now you've had these candidates running with, in party membership sales. I don't see how Kenney's words are going to draw any of those supporters towards his establishment candidate. If anything, it's entrenching them against him.
Dave, we've seen races before where the person running to become the leader runs against the record or the person of the outgoing leader. Jim Prentice may have been on a policy level virtually a carbon copy of Alison Redford, but he ran against Alison Redford nonetheless. Paul Martin ran against Jean Chrétien. That's, even within a party, that's not too uncommon. But this is probably the first time I've seen the outgoing premier running against the leading person to become the incoming premier. What's your take? Do you think, Kenney does still have a number of loyalists in the party outside of just those in his personal paid employ in the premier's office? Do you think this is actually going to hurt Smith?
No, not at all. And I'm like Cory, I think it'll actually help her. As we've discussed before, Travis Taves, member of the Sky Palace community, fraternity, I guess. Fraternity might be the better word. So he's got that hanging around his neck. All the other people that are running were caucus or cabinet ministers, and they're now running to fix the stuff that they screwed up while in power. Travis Taves, I'll fix healthcare. Well, you know what? You were in control of all the spending. You didn't fix it in the last 3 years. Now Danielle Smith she's now the established anti-establishment candidate because Kenney's gone for her personally, hasn't gone for any of the other candidates at all. So I think it can only help her.
So that's where I want to go next. If there's a few continuums or poles in this race, your traditional left-right, your red blues, you have a federalist to full-on independence, and then there's Kenney and anti-Kenney, and a lot of these are Venn diagrams overlapping, and who's where is very confusing. But the Kenney anti question, I think Kenney, the relevancy of that question had been going down through this race. It had been actually much more focused on the issues, namely the issue of the Sovereignty Act. Kenney's intervention, I think, now raises the prospect again of Kenney anti-Kenney. I think it was in Kenney's interest in terms of his legacy and reputation that the race not be all about beating up on Kenney because he's the sitting premier. Is a little awkward, I think, to be trashing him the way you couldn't trash Alison Redford because she was replaced by an interim premier. But he's now made himself a target again. I'll put this to both of you. Do you think this, Brian Jean probably was the most anti-Kenney because he was always anti-Kenney. There's never been a moment where he's pro-Kenney. Whereas Danielle Smith actually was pro-Kenney for a time. Do you think this is going to have Jean still in kind of at least by most polls, a fairly distant third, but it's a third and then a total drop off to everyone else. He's in third place, and there's that 10 to 15%, depending on what poll of the vote that's left for him. How big of an effect do you think this could have in consolidating that anti-Kenney vote that is still with Jean behind Smith?
Go ahead.
Sure. I think it'll be very effective. I mean, the people who are truly anti-Kenney, they want the candidate most likely to, knock off his successor, I guess you could say in a sense. And Kenney's established the one that's the biggest threat to Taves right now. It's not Jean, it's Smith. So those people who have that focus, whether it's, it's not so much a policy focus, but an anti-Kenney focus, an anti-establishment focus, there's the person now. Kenney said that's the one who's threatening the establishment. Here you go. I mean, he couldn't have directed him to her better.
I kind of feel like it's similar to the move that Jim Prentice made in the debate of the 2015 election, where he physically same guy. He literally physically turned his back to Brian Jean, ignoring him, and went after Rachel Notley.
Yeah.
And then that was a signal to everyone in Alberta who wanted the old crooked Tories gone, that if you wanted them gone, you had to vote for that lady. Because the attack on Rachel Notley did not go over very well. It was condescending and just kind of nasty. But what it did is it kind of depressed the Wild Rose. It literally was Brian Jean standing there. So this might be the second time that the Conservative Premier of Alberta has very visibly turned his back on Brian Jean to launch an attack on someone else and elevated that person as the person to beat himself.
Yeah, but smarter people than us, Derek, told us if the Kenney leadership wasn't so full of skullduggery and changes and whatnot, and it was held that first time it was supposed to be held, he would be lucky to get 35%.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a large chunk of the UCP party that just doesn't like Kenney, but they want to be UCPers. They don't. I think something about Brian Jean rubs them possibly the wrong way, and their support will go to Danielle, I think.
Okay. We're going to switch gears a bit here. Just the other room, we have young reporter Jonathan Bradley. He's actually fairly new here, but he's broken some pretty good stories, especially one with TD Bank. TD, if you've gone into a TD lately, it's very colorful. Very colorful place to be. In fact, it's downright maybe a bit gauche. It's over the top. We're diversity. You'd be hard pressed to actually find any information about financial products and protecting your money there. It's very political and it's strange. And they've had a series of, I guess, diversity or I don't know, whatever the hell you call these indoctrination sessions, but some kind of diversity seminars. And they had some diversity experts, I guess, in. And I think, so we obtained our reporter Jonathan Bradley obtained a secret recording of one of these meetings. And we've got the audio of it now. Let's play that for you.
Non-Indigenous politics it's hard for some Indigenous peoples, but when you're actually looking at the different parties, what I've noticed, and I don't actually I haven't really voted that much. I'm starting to try to and learn more about it, but from what I know, conservative goes against a lot of what Indigenous peoples are trying to do because they advocate for pipelines. They don't want Indigenous peoples to have a voice, etc. Whereas, let's say Liberal NDP, they're a little bit more about it, right? Probably the Green Party is huge, actually, because we're also very connected to the land. So I would say more those areas are what to vote for versus conservative, because I've noticed a lot of what their intentions are kind of against Indigenous, I guess, rights, right? So, but that's just very minimal on the surface knowledge that I know about politics. So,
substantially, I'm going to repeat what Carol said. I find that conservatives throughout the country, their priorities are not with reconciliation. We saw when Doug Ford was first elected to office in Ontario, he scrapped the curriculum they were building to incorporate Indigenous history and knowledge, and scrapped that. It had nothing to do with his platform. I have not forgotten that. Whereas I see people like Jagmeet Singh who are trying to consult and actually speaking with Indigenous people what we want, what we're looking for in a government. And we all know.
All right. So that's not the full thing. It goes on and on. So conservatives are racist because they like pipelines. Pipelines are racist. That's I think that's a fair summation of the whole thing, right?
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah. Dave, what's been the reaction to the story? What did TD have to say about it?
Well, TD had nothing to say for day 1 and day 2 and day 3 and day 4. We heard lots of social media chatter, lots of prominent Canadians talking about how ridiculous it was and why would TD even do this. One of our staff members' wives was at a TD bank, and there were 3 people in line ahead of her to cancel their accounts because of this leaked tape. Yeah, and Jonathan had a source who was in the meeting and thought, this is a bit wacky. I think I'm going to record this and send it to Jonathan. So
It must have been going on for a while, because
yeah,
for him to be like, oh, I need to start recording because this is nuts.
yeah. God bless anonymous sources. Just before I get to TD's reaction, Jonathan also broke in the next day or so another great TD story in which a Conservative MP called him and said, you know, I went to the TD bank to open up a fund for the election and put money, you know, donated to the campaign in the fund. And the bank asked him, hey, well, what party do you belong to? And he thought that was entirely inappropriate and walked out and went to another bank. So TD said, no, we were entirely mistaken. That was just a conversation between 2 people. Well, you know, our source was in the room, was full of staffers and being given this diversity talk by these women. So sorry, TD Bank, that just doesn't cut it. In terms of the other story, they admitted that, yeah, our reporting was correct, and they've issued an apology to the MP in question. So I don't think it was TD Bank's crisis communication team's best week. They should have jumped on it on day one and come out with an explanation, but yeah, the bank doesn't look good in this at all.
Well, geez. What the hell do we even say about this? Cory, I've been with TD Bank since I was about 12 or something, 10 or 12 when I opened my dad took me to the bank. You know, my family had been with TD since they immigrated to Canada. We've been with TD. So I'm a 3rd generation TD customer. The Western Standard is with TD. I would have already pulled us out if it wasn't such a pain in the ass to do, but I think we've got to. Unless TD, you want to become the latest sponsor of the Western Standard. Western Standard, brought to you by TD Bank. Don't vote Conservative. It's totally racist. Cory, it's pretty common for corporations now to just go to the most extreme side of woke. But is this really going to be damaging? Because, you know, changing the bank is hard. As I said, like I'm kind of ashamed to admit I haven't changed it yet because it's a huge pain in the ass.
It's hard to say how many people put their money where their mouth is when it comes to that.
You're saying I don't put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah,
and technically, on this issue, so far you're right.
But I mean, most people too. No, I mean, the clowns who teach diversity training, these are the gender studies grads who managed to have a connection high up in the offices and got themselves some sort of job given these seminars. I mean, you're not getting the brightest of bulbs out there, but it says a lot about these woke companies that, you know, with their ESG plans and things like that, that they're training staff for that. It may not turn away too many existing customers, but I can see it chilling with ones who are looking to go. I mean, there's still people currently shopping for a place for their next mortgage, for their next car loan, their next business banking.
Well, remember, it was TD that rejected a mortgage for the Rebel.
Yeah.
Simply because they're the Rebel. I mean, they're not Al-Qaeda. I mean, you can like them or not like them, but they're not Al-Qaeda, for God's sakes.
Well,
they're a business and they're willing to pay you money to do business with you.
They wanted to buy a building, for God's sake. It wasn't like they wanted, you know, something tiny.
We're building cruise missiles or something.
So, I mean, if these were loans officers or who knows who were they speaking to at that, there could be training staff to essentially say, this is the political sides you want to take. And they, you know, maybe decline loans to people who hold the wrong political views or think they certainly didn't say that. I wouldn't imply that, but that's what goes into that training. Maybe. And,
well, you know, if Paul Oliver's talking about waging war on some of the, you know, kind of the central banking system that the big 5 chartered banks rely on very intimately. I think if the banks are going to decide on the politics of their customers, maybe the government should decide on the politics of the bank. If the banks are going to be discriminating in politics, well, wouldn't it be a shame if the central bank didn't directly lend to TD anymore? If TD actually had to rely upon money in its own bank that its customers have put there and not be able to rely on printed money from the Bank of Canada.
Not endearing themselves to the old system, you know, with people who want to come in and make change. But with statements like that, I mean, it seems that the principle of the bank that should be just basically numbers and you know, determining loan risk and things like that, it's been corrupted in a sense. And I could see people shying away in the future, though, at the least. So it could cost them.
Okay, now I feel really bad. Haven't put my money where my mouth is yet. We got to change banks. I got to do it. So yeah, one of our employees' husbands was at the bank and said there was a bunch of people.
Wife was at the bank.
Wife was at the bank,
and 3 people in line ahead of her were all closing their accounts.
And they said it was due to this.
Yep.
TD, totally racist. All right. Speaking of very racist, very bad people, Tamara Lich, insurrectionist, terrorist extraordinaire, honored in Calgary at a gala just the other night.
She was awarded the George Jonas Freedom Award a couple of months ago in Toronto by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. So they had a bit of a celebration in Calgary to top it all off. Tamara was there. Hundreds of her supporters. And she gave a nice speech. I don't think she was photographed with anybody that she's not allowed to be, but she was photographed with that insurrectionist MLA Drew Barnes. So I don't know if that's a breach of her bail conditions. Or not.
Well, she's from Medicine Hat, and Drew represents half Medicine Hat. I'm not sure which half she's in, but yeah.
Yep. So it could have been he could be her MLA. But by all accounts, a great evening was had by all, and she was not taken down by a SWAT team upon leaving.
Cory, we weren't allowed to film this because the last time there were any cameras at essentially the same dinner but held in Toronto, the police sent a bunch of armed goons with guns all the way from Ottawa to Medicine Hat to grab her, detain her, and fly her back to Guantanamo Bay or wherever we're taking these insurrectionists now. So what does this say now that we have to have secret political speeches because the person giving it could be arrested for doing it?
It's been so bizarre and unprecedented. Yeah, as you said, I mean, it was a most trivial of potential bail violations. They sent 2 homicide detectives, no less, all the way across the country to round her up for people trying to pretend that this wasn't politically motivated. Come on, get real. I think Dave was just mentioning a multiple murderer, alleged, a doctor who killed a number of people, is out on bail right now. And they have persecuted. I think it's great, though, that we witnessed these are packed dinners, well attended. She's getting very, good attention from people and appreciation. If they hadn't have gone after her the way they had at the end of this, if they just find her and put her out on bail and say, we'll see you in court next January, most of Canada would have forgotten who Tamara Lich is by now. I mean, people watching it closely would know that she was involved in things like that, but she wouldn't have turned into the symbol that she is.
Guess who the cover photo is of the next issue of the New American? Tamara Lich.
Really?
Or Mike Thomas has got a story on it. It's up on the website now. She's a glowing review of Tamara Lich. Not so much of a glowing review of Justin Trudeau. But, that's... as Cory says, what the government has done to Tamara has made her a folk hero. And it's also worth noting that JCCF asked us not to publicize where this event was happening. Because
this had to be an undisclosed location?
It was an undisclosed location because they didn't want the location to be bombarded with anti-Tamara crap. So, yeah, we withheld the location, and hopefully it's still a secret.
All right. Well, that's it for today. This is a reminder that if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, you need to be. The Western Standard is one of the only media outlets in all of Canada that refuses to take the federal government's media bailout. We rely on the support of advertisers, but mostly of individual people like you to become members. If you go to westernstandard.news and click on membership, you can sign up for just $10 a month or $100 a year to give you unlimited access to all Western Standard content. And you'll be supporting the fantastic team of reporters and opinion writers and broadcasters that we've built here. I'm just so proud of how far we've come in less than 3 years so far. And we've done it with the support of people willing this is news to the CBC, willing to pay for a product that they might enjoy and use. That's what a membership of the Western Standard is. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dave, Cory, and all of you, God bless.